Hey guys, it's Bree here from Blossom and Branch Farm. Tonight I'm coming at you from the greenhouse to talk to you about the top 4 mistakes that you might be making if you are learning to soil block this year. Let's go. I have straw in my hair. I may cheat. If you haven't heard about soil blocking already, I don't know how you could be on my channel and not have heard about soil blocking. But what you need to know is it's a way better way to start your seeds. It's better because it gives you a healthier seedling. So what happens when we are growing things in a soil block, which is literally just a block of soil, is that we get what's called air pruning. So let's see if we can see one where it's happening. What happens is the roots start to hit the sides of this dirt where they're exposed to air and they stop. This is opposed to a tray where the roots hit the side and they start to circle, and that's when you get root-bound seedlings, which leads to a few things like susceptibility to pests, weaker plants, disease, all kinds of issues. So it's a better way to grow your seedlings. It's also more eco-friendly because we're not having to buy a bunch of plastic trays every year. It's just our one little soil blocker. That's it. All right, but that aside, if you want to learn how to soil block, we have lots of videos on that. Today I'm going to talk about the 4 mistakes that you might make if you are just starting with soil blocking. So the number 1 mistake is not getting your blocks moist enough and not keeping them moist enough. So like we showed in our video, when you are making your soil blocks, you have to keep the mix pretty moist. So if you're having trouble pressing out your blocks, go back and watch our videos so that you can see how moist it's supposed to be. Remember, you should be squeezing that soil mix and some water should be coming out your fingers. You should know if you're making a good block or not because it will hold its shape. If your mix is too dry, it's going to be a little bit crumbly and your seeds will have trouble germinating. So the great thing about soil blocks is that things actually germinate a little bit faster because it's a moisture medium. But you need to keep your soil moist because what can happen with soil blocks, because we're compacting them through the act of soil blocking, we're compacting that soil. So what can happen is that sometimes those seeds have trouble working their way down into the block. So if you've started soil blocking, you may have seen this, where the seeds germinate, they sprout, they sit on top of the soil. So there's a couple ways we can mitigate this. Number 1, after they've sprouted, you can sprinkle a little bit of vermiculite over the top if you feel like they're just sitting on top and drying out. Number 2 is to make sure you keep the soil extra moist. You have to keep your blocks moist. You have to keep them wet until that initial root of the seedling has gone down into the soil. Keep them very wet. I'm not just talking moist. You don't want them to get to the point where they just look like, okay, they're somewhat moist, they're still damp. No. You want them glistening until that seed has worked its first root down. Then at that point you can back up on the watering. But until then, keep it extra moist because otherwise the seeds will have trouble. Now, if you do find that your seeds are having trouble working their way down, grab a little handy toothpick, and when your blocks are moist, use your toothpick to help poke it down into the soil. Then you can sprinkle a little vermiculite over the top if you want to, just a little tiny bit to help give it something to keep that root moist on top. The number 2 most seen mistake that I see is using the wrong soil mix. And I want to illustrate this with an example. So there are a million soil blocking recipes out there. When I tell you that I test my recipes, I really actually test my recipes, and I'm not just going to throw stuff out there to be like, I'm going viral with this recipe. I want you to succeed. So I test everything, and I want to show you how important it is. Now, this is a recipe that now I thought this recipe was going to work. This is a recipe that we use with leaf mold output from so I guess it's not technically leaf mold, but we put leaves into our loamy composter. We ran the leaves through. It kind of gave us this peat-like material, and we used that to start our soil blocks. What happened was, I believe, we have some nitrogen tie-up. So those leaves weren't fully broken down. So even though we didn't use much in this recipe, just enough to bind it, it was enough that we have some nitrogen robbing because we're getting the carbon breakdown in the soil, so it's robbing the seedling of the nitrogen it needs. So let's just compare because these 2 seedlings were started at the same time. This is our coconut coir mix. So the coconut coir, green sand, Coco Loco potting soil. That's a myth, by the way, that you can't use potting soil to start seeds. You can start seeds in the garden soil. Therefore, you can start them in potting soil. You just have to be careful which potting soil you're using. But the Fox Farms Coco Loco we found is totally fine. We are not sponsored by them. It's literally just what I use. This is the difference between the two that we've tried. So this one is the coconut coir. This one is the one that used the leaf mold. Same potting soil, just a different medium. And this was only 20%, not even 20%, maybe 15% of that leaf mold, and the rest was the potting soil, but how much of a difference it makes versus this one. So using the correct soil mix. And I want to also show you the other one, which is our wool pellet blend that we published the most recently in our How to Soil Block in 5 Minutes video. That one we used the wool pellets, and the wool pellets, we started this one actually 10 days after this one, and you can see it's nearly caught up and quite healthy looking as well. So using the right recipe is the number 2 thing that I see people doing wrong. Some of these recipes just have no nutrients in them, and so I don't recommend going with one that has been untested. Coming in at number 3 is using the wrong trays. So when I first started soil blocking, I learned from Lisa Mason-Stigler, who is a wonderful soil blocking guru. And so I was using styrofoam plates because that was what she recommended. But what I found was happening was they were so lightweight that if I like bunked it wrong, the whole thing would flip over. So I didn't like using those. And so then I switched to 1020 trays. I didn't like using these either because what happens, okay, so I have my little soil block. What happens if I put my little soil block, see how it tips into the channel? So if you're using these 1020 trays that have these channels running along the bottom, these will tip into those little channels, and then you end up with misshapen blocks. They get worn away as you're watering. I just don't like using them. So that's why I've switched to using the totally flat bottom trays. The other benefit of these trays that I use is that they have a shallow side. So you don't want a very deep side because that's going to hinder the air circulation that can happen around your soil block, which can lead to things like algae growth. So shallow side on that pan is very important because that lets the air flow around your soil blocks, minimizing things like algae growth. So those are the smaller ones, and these are great for home gardeners because we can fit 25, you can see you can fit 25 of the 1.5 inch blocks on these. We'll link these below. These are from Epic Gardening. And then I also use, if you're a market gardener and you grow a lot, we use these big cafeteria trays. I will link these below as well. And these are the big guys. These hold 320 of the mini seedlings. So that's the number 3 mistake that I see, is using the wrong kind of tray. All right, the number 4 mistake that I see when growing with soil blocks, especially for the first time, is using the wrong size. So disclaimer, total 100% brutal honesty here. If I had the space, I would start everything in the 1.5 inch soil blocks that you see here. If I could, I would start everything in the 1.5 inch soil blocks. These are the medium size blocks, and I have, let's see, this is the big tray, and I can fit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 times 5. 80, so I can fit 80 blocks on this tray. So if I could, I would start everything in these. However, I don't have the space because I start 15,000 seedlings for the farm. I just don't have that kind of room, so I use the minis. But if you have the room, I would encourage you, I said that weird, encourage you to use the bigger ones. Here's why. These, I'm not going to take them out of the blocks because I don't want to disturb them until I'm ready to plant, but these are stock flowers, and you can see their size. Now these were started around the same time as these. Okay, so you can see the difference in health and vigor of this seedling that was started in a slightly bigger block, and actually the roots are already reaching the edge of this size block versus in the smaller blocks. So that's not to say that you cannot start things in the minis and plant them out. We do plant them out. I will plant directly into the ground from this smaller size. However, they would definitely be more vigorous, bigger, more healthy if they were started in the 1.5 inch. If you have the space, use the slightly bigger ones. But I think using the 2 inch, which is the bigger size up, so here's the 2 incher compared to the 1.5 incher. I really think that using a 2 inch for everything would be overkill. The 1.5 is pretty good. The only one I really use this for is tomatoes, and that's pretty much it. So the 1.5, yeah, I feel like that's still like the mama bear. I know I call that one the mama bear blocker, and I still believe that. I stand by my term of mama blocker, the happy medium size. So number 4, using the wrong size blocker. All right, guys, I hope that was helpful for you. If you have any other questions, please hit me with them below, and I will try to get them answered, especially as it pertains to soil blocking. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like, and don't forget to subscribe because it really helps us out a lot here at the farm. And I will see you soon in the garden or greenhouse.